Mel Phillips, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Very good to see you.
It's very good to see you. Is the West on the verge of collapse?
Well, it's certainly not looking too healthy. It seems to have a kind of death wish. I mean, for decades, its leading light, its intelligentsia, has been taking a kind of wrecking ball to its core institutions and its core values, on the basis that very explicitly that the West is said to be, fundamentally a bad thing. It was allegedly born in the original sins of colonialism and racism and exploitation and being white-skinned. And consequently, it had to be kind of undermined and replaced by the brave new world of the brotherhood of man, international law, international human rights, international transnational institutions, the United Nations, the International Criminal Court, International Court of Justice, sainted European Union, and so on and so forth. This has had a tremendous effect, and I think it has absolutely eroded the West to the point that the West, quite self-evidently now, does not wish to and doesn't have the means to defend itself against outside predators, outside enemies. It's let its defences wither away. Partly because, it's wanted to spend its money on, welfare stuff, but also because I think it's a culture which has basically totally assimilated the famous lyric of John Lennon, nothing to fight or die for. We're all living in a world of imagine, where there are no divisions and nothing to fight or die for, but we have created divisions. This is the paradox. On the basis that the nation is the source of all bad things. It's the source of prejudice and war and conflict because it's exclusive, because it is itself a nation, it's particularist, and consequently is separate from other similar nations. That was a bad thing because that created division. And so we have this universalist philosophy based on human rights, the individual, what I'm entitled to. And that's supposed to produce a brave new world without prejudice or conflict. But in fact, what it's produced, because it's a rights-based culture, it's produced a society which is no longer a society. It's actually a confederation of competing groups, groups set up to issue demands for their rights, groups that identify in various ways and identify themselves as victims and as good and virtuous because they're victims, as opposed to other groups who are oppressors. And so what we've got is a kind of fight for power all the time. We've also got a complete collapse of moral reasoning and reasoning itself. We, the West, told ourselves, or rather our intellectual elites told us decades ago, there was no such thing as objective truth. Anyone who believed in objective truth was basically a cretin. It was so unsophisticated. Anybody with any intelligence knew that there was only opinion and everything was relative. What I feel is what is. As Oprah famously said, I have my truth, you have your truth.
That's Oprah Winfrey.
Oprah Winfrey, yes.
Just for anyone. Is it Oprah? I thought Oprah.
Well, it's probably Oprah. I don't know. I probably get these things wrong.
Yeah, we have our own truths about the pronunciation.
Well, yes, we can all have our own morally relativist pronunciation. And what I feel trumps any facts because feelings, the subjective trumps the objective. Now, if you have no truth, you have no lies. If there's no truth, you can't have lies. So you don't know the difference between truth and lies. Indeed, there can be no difference between truth and lies. Everything's a matter of opinion. So you have a society which has become very gullible to lies, very credulous to lies. And if you have no truth and you don't know the difference between truth and lies, you can't have reason. And if you can't have reason, you can't have rationality. And I think we have destroyed rationality. So, it's a paradox. We're such a rational society, apparently, that we have basically declared God dead and religion is stupid. And there's no such thing as objective truth, and people who believe in that are cretins. We're so rational that we've got rid of rationality completely because you can't have rationality without truth. And people are believing all kinds of extraordinary things. I mean, the idea that religious belief has gone out the window and in its place has come, the high moral ground of the intellect. I mean, one of the fastest growing things at the moment is witchcraft. People are becoming pagan and they're worshipping inanimate objects. And they're into all kinds of stuff like parapsychology, Eastern religions, which are, I'm sure people can live exactly as they want to live, but the idea that that's rational is the opposite of the truth. So all these things, conscience, reason, justice, to me, these are the core, or three of the most important core values of what we call Western civilization, which I think is actually civilization. These are civilized values. And I think they've all been undermined to the point of extinction. The question is, and this is what I try and grapple with in my book, is it a done deal? Is it now all over? Is the West just going off the edge of the cultural cliff? And many people think it is. People think it's gone far too far. We've destroyed the traditional family. We've destroyed the education system as a means of transmitting the culture because we've told ourselves the culture is too awful to be transmitted. We've destroyed the idea of the nation. So we've destroyed what is basically is the essential building blocks of the culture. So there's no going back. Well, I think there's always going back. I think it's not over till it's over. I draw great comfort from the fact that there are millions and millions of people who self-evidently, demonstrably, are voting, in a way, politically voting, against an entire political establishment. This is across Britain and Europe, against an entire political establishment which has connived at all this. And we may not like who is being thrown up in terms of political leadership. That's not the point. There is this, what's bringing them to power is this resistance among millions of people. So that gives me great heart. And also, as I try and say in the book, I think a lot of people are just waiting for the right kind of leadership to fill a kind of spiritual void and a spiritual vacuum. And people are unhappy. We have a record rates of mental, psychological stress, especially among young people. And to me, a lot of that is to do with meaninglessness, the feeling that, we are kind of random specks in the universe whirling through an infinite nothing. And that's pretty depressing.
Yeah. And
people don't have a sense of purpose. They don't have challenges that mean that they have to overcome them, which is what gives us a sense of purpose. And so on and so on. And so actually, I think there's everything to play for. And I've kind of set out a little kind of action program, which I think can actually help.
It's a wonderful and fascinating book, and it made me think about so many things. And one of them you were just touching on, I think, because there's this meaninglessness that we speak of. I know you were on Winston Marshall's show. Winston, I believe, is a Christian. I'm an atheist. I can't tell from your book because I think you obviously deliberately don't pick a side. Is that fair?
Correct.
But the dividing line today, I mean, that might have been the dividing line 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So what is the dividing line today?
Right. Well, glad you made that point, because it's a very important point that I've tried to make in the book. In the past, we told ourselves there were certain dividing lines, and I think these dividing lines now, if they were ever valid, are now completely irrelevant. The dividing lines I'm thinking of are, for example, left versus right, men versus women, black versus white, gay versus straight, and then religious versus atheist. And then within the religious dimension, Jews versus Christians, or Christians versus Jews, and Jews and Christians versus Muslims, and everybody else versus everybody else. Okay, I don't think that works anymore at all. I think the real dividing line is between the people in every one of those groups who actually really values the West and values the values of the West and wants the West to continue because they want to live like that. And they're in all those groups. And the people in all those groups who really hate the West and want it gone and replaced by something else. And there are a lot of those too. Now, the people who are in the first group who want the West to continue, I've said in the book, I think should basically somehow get together under the right kind of leadership and form what I call a kind of counter-cultural resistance. a coalition for civilization. And it would bring together everybody, people of all faiths and none. So you would certainly be included, and people from all different cultures and identity groups and so on. But the crucial thing is this: that if they wish to, if they value what the West is associated with historically and traditionally, and they want that to continue, then they have to accept that those values didn't just spring from nowhere. They're not imprinted in our DNA. Most societies in the world don't have them. They are particular to the West, and they come from two particular creeds. Christianity, which is the kind of foundational, institutional creed of the West. And here's the thing that surprises people. Christianity itself rests on Judaism, and the values that people think are sacrosanct, if I can use that word, even people who are atheists, for example, respect for everyone, for every human life, for every human being, treating people well as a result, a belief in moral responsibility, taking responsibility for your actions and taking the consequences, a belief that you put others first, so you build community, a belief in justice and the rule of law, and so on and so forth. And the rule of law, by the way, founded in the consent of the people, which is what lies behind democracy. All those things were invented as a revolutionary creed by Judaism. People don't realize that. People don't realize that the rule of law based in the consent of the people is actually a Jewish thing in the Mosaic codes. Now, it's not particularly relevant to anything, except that we're in a society which is quite self-consciously got rid of religion and replaced it by secular ideologies, which I think have produced the opposite of all those good things. So this alliance for civilization, this coalition for civilization that I would like to see from people of all creeds and groups and so on, would have to sign up to that, because that's otherwise they're not defending what the West is. If they think, oh yeah, we're gonna fight for the West and we're gonna fight for universal human rights because that's a key Western thing. Well, no, actually, universal human rights creates groups that fight each other for power, and creates individualism, which is basically self-centered and inimical to community and communal bonds. So we need to actually say, that was a terrible wrong turning. Sounds nice.
Universal human rights.
Yes.
It does sound nice.
Yes. But I think it's, so people, when they hear this, they say, oh, so she's against rights. So she's basically a kind of totalitarian fascist. Well, this is so stupid, I'm afraid, because what we think of as rights is incoherent unless it's within the context of duties. If I claim a right, who am I claiming it from? The state? Well, good luck with that one. You? Well, why should you have any responsibility to give me what I want? What Judaism teaches us is that a civilized society is based on fundamentally duty and personal responsibility. And once you have that structure, which gives you a responsibility for creating the circumstances in which other people flourish, then you have what we have now thought of as rights. But if you detach that from duty, then you don't have rights, you have demands. That's what the rights are, they're demands. And then you have the whole unraveling in a society that basically falls apart because it is run on the basis of individual demands, struggles for power between groups, and an erosion of communal bonds and social solidarity. So, and once we all understood that, but for various reasons, and it's a story that I allude to in the book, because it's such a central thing in the West, the human rights culture, and it arose out of the finest and most noble of instincts after the Second World War, after the Holocaust, in order to protect people who were vulnerable because their own governments were persecuting them. And so the idea, was established that what you needed was international tribunals and international law. But the problem with that is that if you don't have law that is anchored in a sovereign nation, in a sovereign nation governed by the consent of the people, which produces those laws, if you have kind of free-floating laws which are not anchored in any nation, it becomes immediately politicized. It becomes open to political manipulation. That's exactly what we've got